welcome to another episode of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. I'm Bill Current, founder of the Current Consulting Group, and once again, I'm joined by the Senior Vice President at the Current Consulting Group, Brian Feeley. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Good to be here.
This is another in our ongoing series on oral fluid testing, and we encourage you to go to currentconsultinggroup.com. Visit our website, look at the past episodes, not only on oral fluid testing, but on all the various topics that we cover on a week-to-week basis during Currently Speaking. And you'll find all the episodes that Brian and I have done in the past on oral fluid testing. But we encourage you to visit us on all the common popular podcast platforms and like us and subscribe and share with others so that we can continue to grow the number of people who follow and get the benefit from our various podcasts. So today, yet another episode in our ongoing series on oral fluid testing. And Brian, why don't you just give us a little recap on your background with oral fluid testing?
Sure, Bill. I had spent quite a few years at Orashore Technologies helping to launch oral fluid testing into the workplace market. And then that was back around, 1997. I think I joined Orashore. And we launched Intercept in about the year 2000 as we got FDA approval on that product back then. Then spent really till the next 26 years selling oral fluid and helping laboratories, national laboratories, TPAs, end users to integrate oral fluid testing into their drug testing programs. But we also sold it into things like criminal justice and drug treatment centers and a number of other areas, including alcohol testing with our QED saliva alcohol test and some other products that we had. So spent a good deal of time really diving into oral fluids and understanding both lab-based and rapid testing. And prior to that, I was in R&D and spent quite a bit of time in the laboratory developing tests, immunoassays, and kind of was able to learn a lot about the technology behind these tests, which I think is always fun and important to know a little bit about how the tests work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
And so Brian has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to oral fluid testing. So if we don't cover something in this episode or in one of the other episodes on oral fluid testing and you would like to reach out and talk to Brian or ask him a question, go to our website. You'll find Brian's contact information there at currentconsultinggroup.com, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions that you have. For today's episode, let's start out with this. So we know that in May of 2023, DOT announced final regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing to be used by DOT-covered employers to test DOT-covered employees with oral fluid testing through a laboratory. So in addition to lab-based urine testing, for the first time in 30 years, DOT-covered employers would have an option. They would have an alternative testing method that they could turn to, or they could decide to do both urine and oral fluid testing, but it's lab-based. And so we often refer to that as regulated testing or mandated testing. But the majority of drug tests that take place in the workplace market are outside of regulated testing. That's really sort of the major percentage of workplace drug tests. And so, Brian, let's start out by talking about when and how you can use oral fluid testing in non-regulated settings.
Sure. Really in the non-regulated market, outside of just knowing that there are some state laws and there are some things related to where and when you can use different types of methods from a state law standpoint. Really in the non-regulated market, you can use it for pretty much anything in terms of applications for the workplace market. Pre-employment testing, of course, is the biggest category, if you will, for drug testing, where most of the drug testing takes place. And so people are really looking for a good solution that gets people hired on the job quick. And sometimes that's not necessarily urine screening, given the time that's involved in sending people to a collection site, especially during and even post-COVID. Things have changed a little bit in terms of collection sites, not only in terms of attitudes and people's desires to to not go to collection sites, but collection site hours and accessibility and all that sort of thing. So oral fluid has an appeal for pre-hire testing in the sense that an employer can do this. A third-party administrator can do it. A collection group can do it, just going around to sites and doing the collections themselves rather than dealing with urine. So pre-hire, pre-employment testing is a very popular use of it in the workplace market. Post-accident, reasonable suspicion, very popular use of oral fluid because it identifies that use here and now. So it tells us what's in someone's system at the moment, not what they did a week ago or 2 weeks ago. It's a very good indicator of recent use. And that's important in safety sensitive operations or when somebody does have an incident, because now I can identify what's in their system and was a potentially an incident that occurred and a behavior that's been observed. Can I link that with a positive drug screen and say, okay, these all make sense and they marry together. Things like random testing can be done with an oral fluid test. Again, if with an existing employee, I don't have to send them off site. They're not away for 2 or 3 hours going to a collection site. That's a loss of time and therefore productivity. You also have things like follow-up testing, return to duty. Those are modes of testing that can be done with an oral fluid test. And in some cases, you might want to do those with a proctored type solution. Now there are proctored tests that can be done where someone can do that from their own home using an oral fluid test. So, really for non-regulated testing, it's, carte blanche. You can use it pretty much for anything. Again, outside of those state type issues that you have to be aware of.
Well, and also in non-regulated testing, an employer would have the option of doing rapid oral fluid in addition to lab-based oral fluid, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And so in a pre-employment test, for example, and I know that there was a report that Premier Biotech shared a year or two ago that showed that 60% of job applicants who are sent to an off-site collection facility to void a sample never actually show up at the collection site. They probably just go on to some other job interview they have because their objective that day is to get a job. But with rapid oral fluid testing, you can actually do that on site wherever the job interviews are being conducted, and perhaps even with a negative result, offer that person a job the same day.
Correct.
Yeah. So that creates a kind of a new dichotomy, if you will, for employers that are in really tough hiring markets and are in tough competition to fill job openings. What would a company have to do to adopt oral fluid testing? What procedures or steps would they go through to either switch from urine or hair testing to oral fluid, or maybe add it to what they're doing?
Right. So for those companies who are working with a provider, a third-party administrator or some other provider that has a good handle on drug testing and drug testing products and services, they really need to involve them in the process. Go to them, talk to them about oral fluid testing. What is their understanding of the products and services? How would they go about it? Typically, the process should involve, and I would recommend it involve a pilot of the product and the service. But right up front, typically you would want to identify, what do you want to use it for? What is your program? Where does oral fluid fit best in your program? Is it for the pre-hire, pre-employment? Is it post-accident? Is it for the whole program? Because in many cases, as we found, as we talked to companies and we looked at their program, there was really very little reason to not have it used across the board. But one size doesn't need to fit all here. You can pick and choose, and sometimes that makes sense too. You might want to continue to use urine testing for certain parts of your program and oral fluid for others. So identify that with your provider. What's the best use of oral fluid? Pilot it in certain locations. Certainly pick enough specimens, do enough tests to make it worth your analysis to see how did it work, what were the observations, did it work well, did people like it, your employees, your managers, supervisors, how did it go, how did the results pan out, did it provide a cost savings? because that's one of the benefits. And you mentioned rapid testing. Rapid oral fluid tests can typically save quite a bit of money over a laboratory-based testing process. So is that one of your goals, to save a few dollars as well? So identify the goals, identify what locations make good sense to do for your pilot, and then get your provider to help you with that pilot program, and then establish the key people internally that will be part of that pilot program. Set a time goal to it, whether it's a month or 2 months. Have regular follow-up, and then analyze the results of that, and then do your implementation when that's all done, assuming it all went well. If you don't have a provider, which can be a little bit more tricky, you've just been doing a method for 20 years and it's the same old thing that you've been doing, buying some product, then you want to consult with a professional on that, and we can certainly be a resource for that, or others can, are out there for that kind of thing. But I would, if you're not sure what you're doing, but you want to look at oral fluid, you should definitely talk to someone who does know a fair amount about it, in order to make that change.
Yeah, and one of the things that we always take a client through at the Current Consulting Group when they're thinking about adding or changing drug testing programs is we help them answer 3 questions. Is this testing method you want to do legal? Is the method that you're going to use accurate? And then is it practical? On a day-to-day basis, will it work for you? And a pilot program can help an employer answer that question. Is it practical? Does it work in our work environment? And just about any provider is going to be happy to do a pilot program for you. And then finally, Brian, as a company does this, what other changes or things would they have to do to sort of get their program ready to actually start doing oral fluid testing?
Yeah, great question. And I'll probably throw this one back to you, Bill, because it ties to policy, and you're more of an expert at this than I am. So obviously they want to take a look at their policy, right? And what are the things that, they would really want to do to make sure that's buttoned up?
Yeah, we're gonna take a client through a questionnaire. It's a 6-page questionnaire. It's going to help us understand what their drug testing objectives are, what they want to do, and what they hope to get out of it. And specifically, we're going to put in individual state addendums to that policy that may have differing legal requirements from their home state. So, for example, it's going to be a customized policy, but if you're in, say, 30 states and you're based in Iowa, we're going to write your main policy based on Iowa. But then in any of those other 29 states, we're going to add addendums to the policy to take into account any legal requirements. And when switching to a testing method like oral fluid testing or rapid oral fluid testing, you're going to find information in there that in most cases allows you to use oral fluid testing. There are only 3 states that don't specifically allow lab-based oral fluid testing right now: Maine, Hawaii, and Vermont. But in all the other states, we're going to put in information in that individual state addendum that explains specifically what's required in that state in order to do oral fluid testing. And so a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all policy would never work, period. But especially if you're adopting a new or different drug testing method, you're going to want those state specific addendums in there. And then you're going to want a section in there on oral fluid testing, how we collect the specimen, what's required of employees, what's required of supervisors, etc. So you're going to have a very specific question with a lot of detail in the policy that relates to oral fluid testing, so that any supervisor in your company who has responsibility for your program to carry it out and make sure the tests get done can go to that policy, read the specific instructions on oral fluid testing, and know precisely what to do. Employers have an option, right? If they're doing oral fluid testing, it's easy enough to do an oral fluid collection that you could have employees, supervisors trained to observe the process. You don't necessarily have to use a professional technician at an offsite collection facility. You can even bring professionals onto the work site and do it on site. But either way, you're going to explain that in the policy so that when supervisors who are responsible for carrying out your program need to initiate an oral fluid test, they know precisely what to do. And it takes all the guesswork out of the process.
Yeah, very, very good.
So with that, we'll conclude this episode. Anything else, Brian? I kind of cut you short there.
I guess just one other thing, Bill, because we talked a lot about non-regulated testing in this podcast, but I want to just remind or inform our listeners that we did a couple of different podcasts on the regulated market and what's happening with DOT and the federal testing, and that's those are worth a listen because I know that things are evolving, and so for those customers or those clients that are in the regulated market, whether they're in a DOT or they're a federal employer, they may want to know what's going on with using oral fluid in those areas. So give those a listen. In a nutshell, we're getting closer, I think, to being able to use laboratory-based oral fluid testing in those regulated markets. And dare I say, 2024, we'll see it. But certainly in the new year, you'll be using oral fluid for the regulated markets and in DOT. Stay tuned on that topic.
Yeah, tremendous interest in oral fluid testing, both in the drug testing industry and among employers. So it's perfect timing. And if you'd like to learn more about oral fluid testing, we encourage you to go to currentconsultinggroup.com, look up our past episodes of this podcast, Currently Speaking. You'll hear Brian explaining all kinds of issues related to oral fluid testing. It may seem kind of complex in the beginning, but in reality, once you understand these basic issues, you can see how oral fluid testing could work for your company, depending on your circumstances. And we believe, as we look at industry trends, that oral fluid testing will continue to grow. When all is said and done, Brian, how many episodes will we have done on oral fluid testing?
So I think there are about 18 different modules, Bill. And there's basic, there's mid, and there's advanced level. So if I'm not mistaken, there are 6 different categories and then 3 different levels within each one. So if my math is right, I think that's 18.
I'm glad I asked you the question because I was going to say 24 and that would not have been correct. So
I could be wrong.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for joining us for another episode of Currently Speaking. Visit us at currentconsultinggroup.com for past episodes of Currently Speaking. Like us, subscribe, share, spread the word, and help us grow our followership for these very informative episodes, not only on oral fluid testing, but on all the other topics that we cover. And with that, have a great day.